I'm just going to read the title. Yeah, Unlocking Energy Efficiency, Effective Strategies for Building Management. Yeah, good to go? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll be touching a little bit about energy efficiency, mainly for your buildings. So there'll be two parts to the segment. We will be talking about the policies, the agencies that are involved, and towards the later stages, we'll be talking about technology and solutions. Yeah. So a little bit about the speaker. That's definitely not me. My name is Murali. Prabodh couldn't make it. He's the founder and CEO of ICE Energy. Focuses on HVAC, energy efficiency and solutions. So before we start, it's very important to realize that in terms of energy efficiency, you need to be able to three things. You should be able to measure, manage, and improve on your readings. Yeah. So if you don't measure and you don't know what you're consuming, it's a bit difficult to identify benchmarking, difficult to identify your progress, and also your planning stages. So first up, we're going to be highlighting in terms of the agencies and standards involved. We've got the Malaysian standard, which is the latest, 1525. So that's something that you could follow through. Of course, earlier the speaker spoke about ISO 50001. That's another mechanism that can be put in place. But more importantly, in terms of measurement, we would follow a standard called IPM-VP, which is an International Standards of Measurement and Validation. Now, there are four agencies that you would like to know about or speak to. First is SEDA Malaysia. Later on, I'll be touching about grants under SEDA Malaysia. Secondly is Malaysian Green Tech Technology and Climate Change, MGTC for short. And if you're interested in solution companies that are providing energy savings, you would be liaising with those in Suruhanjaya Tenaga as well as MESCO, which is the Malaysian Association of Energy Services. Now, starting off towards benchmarking, it's very important for an organization, the buildings that you have, or even the townships, the factories, is to identify what are the standards that you want to embark on. So first off is what we known as Green Building Index, or GBI. It's a Malaysian standards derived slightly from the best practices around the world, such as LEED and also BCA Green Mark. And for different segments, for existing, new buildings, townships, you've got different methodologies, different forms to follow through in order to derive your rankings. So similarly, you've got also for retail, and also township. The other standard by REDA is called Green RE. These are also suitable for non-residential as well as residential market, and also for township. So there are a couple of standards that you will have to identify that's aligned to your building. CIDB uses a benchmarking tool called MICRES, developed locally, and that takes a longer period as well. So not just the initial installation, but rather over time, the construction, the O&M, as another means of measurement and validation. Last but not least, on the international level, you've got LEED, which is where our GBI standards were derived from as well. More complex, but internationally recognized. So as a consumer or as a building owner, if you want to align yourself with international standards, LEED would be one of those. And also if you've got businesses, clients out of Singapore, then BCA Green Mark would be one of those. Now, across all these different tools, you are allowed to apply for multiple certifications. You're not limited to just one particular certification. So once you identify that, you would be following the methodologies which are readily available online, or you could hire a local consultant to guide you through. Now, just a brief introduction of the different terminologies which you would have heard throughout the session, yesterday, today, and even tomorrow. Some of the three-letter alphabets like SDG, ESG, GHG, RECs, and of course the carbon market. So I'm just going to briefly run through what this means, because when you're going to do your benchmarking, you're going to go for certifications, you want to see how this aligns to the bigger picture, right? So first up, we've heard SDG over the years. Sunway is a very big group that's championing from a township perspective, including their buildings and also their institutes. Yeah. So if you go to their website, they have a dedicated page talking about this. So key thing to identify is if you're looking at your building level, you want to see what are the 17, which of the 17 targets that you want to implement, because this then corresponds to the ESG target. I'll show how it overlaps. Now with ESG, that's the buzzword today. Every 2-3 years, you hear certain things like blockchain, cryptocurrency. Now it's the time of ESG. Across the 3 areas, energy itself would fall under environmental. Yeah, what kind of carbon footprint you are having for your building. And of course, as a company level, you got to look at logistics, you got to look at your vendors. So there are a lot of criteria to cover. And one of the important things is, again, within ESG, you've got different standards to go through. Yeah, whether you want to be on GRI compliant, there's no real ISO standard yet, but this is where you kind of look at the best practices and you comply to it. Now, even though the topic today is for building, as for any other organization, you always want to look at high level. Depending on your particular organization, you may want to align to the country level, or you may say, look, we are Bursa listed, so we want to align towards Bursa requirements. So these are a couple of available standards. And again, these are not ISOs. They're not yet ISOs, but they're just best practices. So you will need to be continuously updated in terms of application. Just to highlight in terms of countries' outlook, because in my next slide, I'll highlight some of the bigger brands that have gone net zero, carbon neutral. A lot of terminologies are being used today. But key thing is everybody wants to be carbon neutral. Malaysia has a target as well. And the other SBTI standard that's being used right now is you want to limit the temperature rise up to 1.5 degrees. So as an organization, you would have to pick your direction when you then implement your energy efficiency solutions. So here, just to again highlight, we've got Petronas talking about 2050, TNB net zero by 2025, and also Sunway by 2050. So everyone's got targets. Some are saying as early as 2025, some are saying 2035, and of course the ultimate goal is 2050. Yeah. But just to highlight, it's easier said than done. Recently, I think Nestle decided to change their stand. So again, everybody's kind of figuring out whether it's even possible, because when you talk about oil and gas, that's a different kind of challenge altogether. So just bear in mind, the entire journey is all about figuring out as we go along. It's not yet set in stone. So as we learn about the market, especially on the carbon market, and we talk about renewable energy certificates, we are still evolving. So just to summarize, when I spoke about SDG and ESG, I kind of like this overlap because it kind of tells you how the overlap could happen. Yeah, it doesn't have to be seen in silos. And again, we're touching about social governance and also economics. Yeah, there's another additional scope there. And it's not possible, to be honest, not possible to achieve all 17. You have to see what's aligned to your organization needs, including forward and also your vendors, in order to have a more holistic approach. Very briefly, I just wanted to touch, because as you jump into energy efficiency, a lot of this data that you're going to be collecting or saving is going to be converted into a carbon narrative. And if you're talking about GHG, yeah, greenhouse gases, your scope 1, 2, and 3 would also be a reflective of this. So these are just methods, the kind of markets that's available. So Bursa has already established our Malaysia's first, I'll call it voluntary market standards. There was one round of bidding, buying and selling, but we're waiting for the next one. And again, just to highlight, even though we have a white label with Vera, even Vera recently got caught with some scandal. So, like I said, take this as best practices. Don't take it as the gospel truth. Look at it as ways of improving your policies, your targets, your benchmarking, and eventually your goals. Yeah. These are just indication of what could happen. There are some countries, especially Singapore, our neighbor, who's already got carbon tax implemented. I do understand Malaysia were also looking at this, was looking at this, and the target is something like 150 for every ton of CO2. Yeah. But it's not yet implemented. So right now it's still voluntary, but eventually we could move into this segment. This is just a brief of how the carbon market is evolving. If you guys have been following the news the last few days, a lot of stories from Sarawak, Sabah, on the rights of who gets the authority to sell and trade in the carbon market. So Cambodia, Taiwan, even Philippines, it's all doing it at country level. Yeah. This is just for info. I'll skip this for now. Okay, coming back to RECs, from what I understand, RECs are meant purely for scope 2, yeah? So if you're on scope 1 and 3, you would go towards the carbon market. If it's fuel and gas, you would go towards RECs. So today, you can actually generate your own, or you can do a virtual offsite solar plant to buy green tariffs. Alternatively, you could also buy it from the open market, yeah? So there is MREC that's managed by TNB, and you have a couple of people out of India, out of Singapore, that's also trading these RECs. Yeah? Now, the intention of this segment was to kind of highlight that once you do your benchmarking, how can we move towards then monetizing those incentives? Yeah. So I'm going to run through a little bit on the solutions. Some of the terminologies that we've been seeing is like BMS, Building Management System, EMS, Energy Management System, IIoT is Industrial Internet of Things, AIoT is like AI and IoT bundled together. So essentially, they're all the same with plus minus here and there. And for those who've been in the industry long enough, you had the M2M, you had SCADA. So this is just the evolution of those parameters. Now, what you need to understand is you have to see what's relevant to your building. Yeah, a lot of people focus a lot on energy. You've also got your gas usage, your water usage, your wastewater treatment. And if you're running a factory, it's also important to correlate those consumption pattern against your production on a per unit basis. So depending how deep you dive into your equipments to measure even, per output or per unit, what's the kilowatt hour consumption, what is the water consumption, in order to have the right benchmarking. And again, why I put these two photos here is to highlight that if you are looking at a solar generator solution, EMS would mean something else. In a factory level, you would have a different need for that energy management system. Now, the other difference in any sort of system that you implement is all about the ability of what you do with the data. You don't want something that's going to store data and then manually you got to jump in, you got to infer the data, translate, make sense of it. It's all about timing. Today, there are solutions out there that can do this in real time. It can also help you make decisions, and that's where the AIoT comes into play. Because when it needs to be actively monitored, actively making decisions, you can actually do that with platforms. Yeah. And the key thing is why I brought up the part 1 and part 2 earlier about REC, ESG, and all of that, is all this data that you collect is valuable for your reporting purpose. Again, maybe 5 years ago, Excel was everything. Today, you've got softwares, and especially if you run multi-operational companies or even banks where they have multiple branches, you want to be able to gather all this information so that the group level can actually report. So then you have to look at what are the best softwares and platforms that can do this. So this is what I was saying earlier. Today, it's the ability to know everything, not just internally within your building, but if you are into logistics and you're supplying equipments, materials, you want to know your fuel consumption of your vendors, your suppliers. If you're in the furniture business, you want to know if those wood are being sustainably sourced, right? So there are a lot of these conversations happening today. So coming back to the key conversation today about energy management or being energy efficient, it's very important to take the first two portions, as I mentioned earlier, to know what are the benchmarks or standards that you want to follow through and what is your end goal, and kind of match it so that you're able to frame the energy efficient plan that you have to be brought forward to your management. Yeah, and again, in any company, I think earlier in PGS mentioned that you need the buy-in of your stakeholders. So it's not just a bottom-up approach. You need people sitting from the C-suite, coming in, sitting for your meetings, because it's very easy to say, guys, we need to cut costs by 5 to 10%, but they don't provide you any budget for that, right? So there needs to be an alignment with what you decide in item 1. Number 2 is then having an open source or a platform that's free and easy. You're able to integrate. When you go with some big brands, sometimes the source code is limited. You're not able to integrate third party into it. So when you identify a partner, you need to be able to look at what are the flexibility that's accorded in order for you to, marry brand A with product B with software C. That open platform thing is important. And last but not least, the ability to start on a pilot level, do a proof of run, validate it, look at the savings, and then scale it accordingly. Now, the common challenges that we see, and most of y'all may be experienced in this already, is you start off with the wrong footing. Yeah, you start off thinking that this is what you need to do, but there's no buy-in for everyone. So the best way is what we see today is companies aligning to the national or council or even country policy, which is the net zero conversation, but not everyone can go through that path. So you need to find a middle ground to identify a benchmark that is achievable, and it has to be a long-term plan. You can't switch or change a business overnight. So you may say, look, we have a 3 to 5 year plan. Every year we're going to do 1 to 3% or 3 to 5%, but be able to identify the opportunity at an early stage. Coming back to item 2 though, is, like I said, you start off on the wrong baseline, you start off on the wrong benchmarking, and after a year or 2 years, you realize you have to restart the entire conversation. 3, I spoke about it earlier, having all stakeholders involved from day one itself, the buy-in, in order to get the right budgets approved. And item 4, today we've got energy saving companies that can come in, provide you with an energy saving option, whether it's 70-30, 80-20, and more importantly, it breaks that barrier of trust, because when somebody else makes that investment, it means they believe in the technology, they know how to deliver that solution in the right manner. So this is briefly about AIoT. I'm going to run through an example of how energy management can help. Just to let you guys know, there's an existing SEDA audit grant available today. You can still apply for this for both factories and industrial and commercial buildings. Previously, it used to be something like 300,000 kilowatt hour. Now it's only 100,000. And it's still applicable, And what SEDA does is they need you to be able to set targets, What are your benchmarking requirements? But this is also something that you can enable for free today, so that you have something to go back to your management and say, guys, this is where we stand today as a building, as a company, These are briefly the processes, but just to highlight. And again, this initial grant requires that actions be taken in the next 3 years. That's one of SEDA's requirement. You spend or you get up to 100,000 for the energy audit, but in 3 years you got to implement actions. It can be low-hanging fruit to expensive solutions, as long as that 100,000 is utilized. So it can be from chiller management to LED lights to anything. But they require you to spend it in 3 years. So the next slides will highlight more on chillers, because that's our company background and that's where most of your consumption tends to be. Is the importance of having data, being able to collect your inlet and outlet temperature, your water flow, and being able to make decisions immediately. So I'm going to show you how that impacts in a couple of slides. So the solution that we implement follows the IPM VP standards. We establish baselines, we look into behavior, and what happens with the clients is we are able to switch on and off to indicate the overall savings. So this benchmarking is live. It's not that we do it in the first year and then we say, look, you're married to us for 5 to 7 years, and that's it. At any time, the customer is able to go into a bypass mode he's able to revalidate after 6 months and say, okay, I am getting the savings that I was promised. So this is where when you put in AI, it measures, it validates, and it improves along the way. Yeah. Component-wise, I will show you the difference before, when it was wired and wireless. Typically, you've got different components, and this is purely for HVAC, right? So if you're looking at motors and pumps, you would have vibration sensors, for example. If you're looking at air compressors, you would have a compressor sensor. So depending on your need, you would actually implement the solution. Just an overview for you all to understand typically where the sensors go in. So we're measuring power, and we're measuring also the delta between your chillers. So previously, before having wireless solution, you had to wire every unit in a daisy chain. Today, with wireless solution, it's simplified tremendously. It's faster to set up, and it's easier to monitor. Yeah, and this is inclusive of your digital power meter. You no longer need RS-485 cabling or Ethernet cables to power up. Now, why chiller optimization needs to be live or needs to be active all the time is due to the variables, the weather pattern, the occupancy rate, right? So what the sensors are doing is it's measuring your external temperature, it's looking at occupancy, it's making a decision on whether should I ramp up or ramp down. Yeah, so that's where the AI part or the intelligence comes in. Of course, the same thing can be done towards other things. For example, lighting, having motion detection, live detection, and identifying are there people around. Yeah. So this is just to give you an overview of how that different measurements are helping out in making decisions in terms of temperature correction and also consumption. So just to highlight that for every degree of increase, there's about 1 to 2% of savings in terms of energy. So with the wireless solution, you've got less wiring process, less downtime, easier to collect data, and of course, when you want to do a swap, it's much more easier, yeah, because it's wireless. So coming back to the benchmarking portion, yeah, what happens over that period of 2 to 3 months is you continuously gather data. The system is continuously learning, right? So like I said, depending on the platform or the software that you're using, and there are plenty right now in the market, not just out of Europe, within Malaysia, Singapore, there are a lot of companies that can do this, and it's beyond HVAC, yeah. An example of when the solution is implemented, yeah, one is in a bypass mode, two is without any soft start or dynamic maximum demand control, and the blue color is with soft start and shutdown control. So even when the system restarts or shuts down, it's able to reset and start fresh. So this is what I mentioned by clients have the ability to kind of switch on, move into a bypass mode, and then come back into operations, yeah, or enable the saving. So just to summarize, once you're able to monitor, you're able to put in analytics, have some intelligence at the back, and all of this then meets the target that you've set from day one, which is whether it's a GBI standard or it's a MS1525 standard. Just some brief numbers in terms of energy optimization. If you were to look at AHU, what kind of savings, improving your cooling tower efficiency, these are the numbers that we can see. And of course, also about maintenance, right? If you're monitoring, you're actually observing, you can actually have more savings in terms of your maintenance, more predictive rather than reactive. I'm going to pass the mic to Omar to speak a little bit about solar as part of the energy efficient solution.
Okay, afternoon everyone. My name is Omar. I'll just be speaking a little bit about rooftop solar implementation that can easily be done on existing rooftops. So I think we can skip this part about me. Basically, I am a consultant. We carry out renewable energy works consultancy, but today we're going to focus on rooftop solar. So when we talk about rooftop solar, it is something that is easily implemented because it is there for quite some years. The government has come up with a few mechanisms and initiatives over the last few years to help push this renewable energy transition. So over the past few months, we've been talking about, or we've been listening a lot from the minister on energy transition, but they are of course talking about very large renewable energy generation. So what we can do for rooftop solar, there are basically a few mechanisms that has been implemented by the government. So if you can see on the slide, there is something called net energy metering, which is the option for you to install rooftop solar with the ability to export the power to offset your electricity bills. So if you generate more than you consume, or if let's say there are days where you are not consuming electricity, if you are an office building, you operate Monday to Friday, so you have Saturday and Sunday where you are not consuming any electricity, you can actually offset it in your bill. So this power goes back to TNB's grid, and they actually pay you, they don't pay you in cash, but they offset whatever amount that is actually generated from your system. So the government has implemented this. It's a quota-based system. It's called NEM Nova now. There's of course the NEM government, which is for government buildings, and then there is the NEM Rakyat. So the NEM Rakyat is actually meant for domestic users, for houses. So it's a one-to-one offset. So whatever tariff that you're paying to TNB, it's also the same amount that is offset from the generation that is exported to the grid. That is for houses. For NOAA, for commercial businesses and in the industry, it is using the system marginal pricing that is set by single buyers. So this is a fluctuating price. So whatever that is calculated as excess generation for that month, it is paid or it is offset into the next month's bill. So the offset period is for 10 years. So you get a 10 years offset with the utility company. There is a limit, however, for NEM. It is only up to 1 megawatt AC if you are using, if you are a TNB customer. So there are two things that you can do. One is net energy metering. The other is self-consumption. So self-consumption solar is basically installing solar on your rooftop. And as mentioned in the name, it's meant for self-consumption. So with this sort of installation, you're not actually allowed to export any of the power to the grid. It's meant it's meant to be fully utilized by the customer. So this is something that's more ideal for factories that run 24/7. They operate 7 days a week, where there is no possibility of export, or very unlikely possibility of exporting the power to the grid. So there is no particular limit for this, as in there is no particular quota for it. It's open, but it is still limited by certain things. There are regulations that limits the amount of generation that you can actually produce. There is also some limits based on the specifications of the equipment. We'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, so this is just a little bit of changes in the government policy that happened in July. So now, as you can see, the government is pushing towards renewable energy even further. So there is a bit of allowance that is better than what it used to be. Even customers who are taking electricity supply from 132 kV voltage is allowed to do self-consumption solar now, which is something that was not allowed to be done previously. Okay, so this is basically just an overview of the irradiance in the region. So typically in Malaysia, we would say it's about 3.5 to 4, and it is slightly better in the north regions. It is slightly less in the southern regions. Okay. So what we tend to do is for you to come up with a rooftop solar, we come up with a proposal. So this is basically what we tend to do. So usually we do a site feasibility study. So when we conduct a site visit, we actually look at the roof condition, what is the space on the roof that is allowable for solar installation, and then we will propose a suitable system. Okay. Okay, so our offers usually come with technical offer, commercial offer, what are the capacities that we can install, what are the equipment that we use in terms of modules, inverters, and then of course the commercial offer, whether it is a capex model, so where you actually pay for it, or it can also be a PPA model where it's a zero capex model, so an investor comes in and pays for the system. Okay, so there is actually no cost to the user. Okay, so there are safety standards that have been introduced. I think I can probably skip this. It's basically standards, MS standards, IEC standards to ensure that the solar PV installation in Malaysia is also up to international standards. Okay, so an example of a case study. So when we look at what is the size that can be installed for a rooftop solar, so there are basically three things that we look at. Of course, first is the roof area itself, because that is your physical limitation. Whatever space that's available on the roof is whatever that you'll be able to install. Secondly is the limitation that is inside the guidelines by the government. So if you have low voltage tariff, you are limited to installing only 60% of the fuse ratings or the current transformer ratings of the meter. If you are medium voltage customer, you can install up to, well, now it's actually it's been changed to 85% of the maximum demand. So firstly, we look at your roof area. Secondly, we look at what is the limitation in terms of generation. So whether you can install up to 85% of your maximum demand or 60% of your fuse rating. And then finally, we look at your actual consumption, because what we want to do is this is not meant to be power generation for sale to the utility grid. So it's meant for self-consumption. So we always try to size the rooftop solar to be less than your actual consumption, or somewhere very close to it. Okay, so this is basically just a typical case study for a commercial proposal. So the fuse rating is actually quite big, it's 400 amps. So based on that, you can actually install roughly around 140 kilowatt AC of solar. So it comes to about 170 kilowatt peak. So this is the first thing that we see. But their bill is actually quite low. So they are using only about 3,000 kilowatt hour a month. So if you install 140 kilowatts, you are going to get a very big system with a lot of excess generation. So if it's for self-consumption, it won't work. Even if it is for net energy metering, whatever offset is going to be zero. So it wouldn't really make sense to do that. So the based on the TNB bill, we are only proposing something along the lines of 30 kilowatt peak. So 30 kilowatt peak will give you a roughly a monthly yield of around 3,000 over kilowatt hour. So this is roughly the usage of the customer, right? So they are using about 3,000 kilowatt hours. They are generating 3,000 kilowatt hour as well. So basically, the electricity bill from TNB comes to a very small amount or a very low amount. Okay, so what we usually do is after we come up with this proposal, of course, we again look at the modules that we use. So in Malaysia, there are a lot of models that are used like QCell, Trina, Jinko. These are all tier 1 modules. So this tiering system is actually a Bloomberg tiering system. So it's just to ensure that the modules that are being used are those I would say those that are good. So basically, there is also a warranty. So we are looking at solar module warranties on 12 years on the product, 25 years on the performance. Inverters usually standard, it's about 5 years. It can also go up to 10 or 20 years. So next, maybe just a little bit on the different models I was mentioning. So there are basically two ways to implement a solar rooftop these days. There are a lot of people who are actually looking to invest. There are a lot of big companies who are willing to invest. Even TNB has a subsidiary called G Sparks who is an investor. There are also a lot of outside investors. So if you look at the capex model, this is basically where the customer pays for the solar system themselves. So if you're looking at an ROI or for a payback period of 5 years, but there are tax allowances that has been given by the government. So with the tax allowance and the capital allowance, the payback period comes to approximately 3 years. And because you have a 10 years contract with TNB, so it is actually still a very good thing to be done. And the solar system, even though after your 10-year contract for net energy metering, you can actually use the solar system for 20 years easily. There is a little bit of degradation over the years, maybe about 1% a year, but the solar system typically will be able to last for about 20 years. Right, so a payback period of approximately 3 or 4 years is actually going to be something that's quite significant. So that's for CAPEX model. There is also the PPA model, power purchase agreement. So for a PPA model, there is basically no upfront cost. So this is something that's much easier to be done, and it is something that's actually being funds to do this. So this is where the PPA model comes in. So there's no upfront cost. So there's a profit sharing between the investor and also the owner. So of course you do not get the savings that you see if you were to pay for it upfront yourself, but the savings are still there, and you can also look at branding yourself as a ESG conscious or company that is going towards renewable energy. Okay, so this is just a sample bill once you already have your net energy metering approved by SEDA Malaysia. And so if you can see, you can actually look at, is that clear? Yeah, so you can actually see what is the amount generated. So that's the maximum allowable quantity MAQ. So that is the amount that was excess generation for that particular month, and also the average system marginal pricing for that particular month. So here you can see that there was actually no excess generation. So if you look at the green block, there is actually no amount that was actually offset. So all the power was actually consumed by the consumer. Okay. So this is a case study for residential. So for residential, you can go up to, now I think they recently announced that you can go up to 12 kilowatt AC. So for residential, it depends entirely on, again, the size of your roof, what is the number of panels that can be installed, and secondly, what is your monthly usage of your electricity bill. Okay. So here's just a simple example. So if your bill is 1,000 ringgit, so the consumption is approximately 2,000 kilowatt hour. So using 12 kilowatt peaks of solar, you'll be able to generate about 1,200 kilowatt hours. So you're looking at a balance of only paying 340 ringgit, so about 682 ringgit worth of saving. So again, the payback period is roughly around 5 to 6 years. So this, for residential, it has become something that is quite significant, I would say, because now with the new tariff that has been imposed, there is a penalty if you were to use anything above 700, 1,500 kilowatt. Yeah, 1,500 units. So it's about roughly around 700 over ringgit. So anything that, if you use anything more than 700 over ringgit a month, you actually have to pay a penalty of, I think it's 10 cents. Right, 10 cents for all the units. So it is a good time to move. The government is also trying to push for this. So with the NEM Rakyat, I think the quota ends in 2023 December. But maybe, or there could be a chance that this quota will actually be extended until next year if the uptake is not completed. Okay. So this is a residential NEM billing. So as you can see, there was an export of 4,422 kilowatt hours extra. Okay, you wanna? Yeah. So I'll pass this back to Murali to speak about a little. Thank you.
So guys, just to touch a little bit on the other solutions of measuring, benchmarking, identifying your usage. There are products out there that can do vibration sensors and also air compressor performances. Battery energy storage, mainly used for maximum demand control or management, because our price arbitrage between peak off peak or whatnot, it's not significant. But energy storage can also help with your self-consumption. Let's say you over-generate, you can also have as a buffer. So from an application standpoint, what you're doing is you're shifting a certain threshold where your battery comes into play so that you don't pay like 37 ringgit per kilowatt or 45 ringgit per kilowatt. Last but not least, there are also products out there. So earlier I spoke about solution that actively can control and manage. There are also products out there called like Climate Check. It's a European brand where you do like a health check. So you say, look, Murali, I don't know where to start. I don't want to implement a solution. You can actually have tools and products that can come in to do instantaneous measurement, give you a brief about your system performances, and then you take the next step forward. So that's about it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, I think we've got time.
The set up fund that is allowed for energy efficiency, can the client apply or the person who's doing the job is applying? I mean the
Client has
vendor.
to apply with an ESCO.
with the ESCO.
With the ESCO, yeah.
Then who does the job basically?
It'll be the energy
energy manager.
energy management company. Yeah,
So they will appoint.
correct. The
That's-
client will appoint.
Client will appoint.
That's right.
Okay, so the client applies for that 100,000 or something
Correct.
mentioned for set up fund.
So
and
the
for 3
payment
years.
goes to the client, and then the client will disperse the amount to the
amount
vendor.
rate lah. Okay, so basically any companies can apply for it lah. Basically
Yes.
for
Anyone who meets the 100,000 kilowatt hour a month.
100,000
Kilowatt hour
a month.
a
Okay.
month minimum. Yeah. Okay, that's it, I guess. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a safe drive back. Bye bye.